Okay, thank you everyone for joining today for what is turning out to be our weekly ISC webinar series. So today we're going to be talking about domain hijacking, and we're fortunate to have Matt Stith with us from Spamhaus today. You may recall if you joined our webinar, I want to say it's about 2 years ago now on RPZ, that was given by Matt and myself. So we've sort of rejoined the team here. So again, today's topic is domain hijacking. When we first started putting this webinar together, I have to admit I was sort of blown away by the numbers of domain hijackings that Spamhaus has seen. I'm excited to see what Matt has, what else Matt has put together here. Anyway, back to the topic at hand, domain hijacking. So when you probably know ISC, most likely as the authors and maintainers of bind. So when we talk about use of bind in the DNS, we're talking about ways for which you can insert authoritative data for your domain into the DNS so the rest of the world can reach you. Now, the way that works for you to be authoritative for your domain is that you have to have a delegation. And that delegation process takes place essentially in a little bit different part of the DNS ecosystem. So this is when we get into talking about registrars and registries. So domain hijacking, specifically what Matt's going to talk about a lot, is how you manage the relationship with your registrar. So if I want to register a domain and begin serving authoritative data for that domain, I do that via a registrar. And so if I, of course, then it sort of should go without speaking that the maintenance of that relationship with your registrar is critical to you maintaining your presence on the internet. And so unfortunately, what happens a lot is people don't keep up with their registrar credentials, or someone leaves that had the credentials. So that's, there's some of the issues that we'll talk about. So Matt's going to sort of walk through the history or what we're seeing with domain hijacking at this point in 2020. And then he'll talk about ways that you can protect yourself in sort of a monitoring situation, and ways that you might want to increase the security of your registrar relationship. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt. So Matt, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Eddie. And just since we are all sitting here at our homes or where not, just want to make sure that I can be heard by everybody. Just a single ping from anyone would be amazing.
I can hear you just fine, Matt.
All right, excellent. And the things are coming through. So yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Eddie. As a quick just go over, yes, this is what we're going to be talking about today. The what, why, and how of domain hijacking, a couple of examples, high-profile stories, and then finally some things that people can do to protect themselves, their domains, networks, and a couple of things of advice for registrars as well. And then whatever we have left, we'll just do a little bit of Q&A. So with that, let's get rolling. So what is domain hijacking? Essentially, it is malicious actors gaining access to a domain's DNS records. And these domains are legitimate, so they're definitely not owned by these malicious actors. And what they end up doing is they end up changing the DNS of this domain to point to their own infrastructure. And when they do this, when they do it with the root or the main domain, that means that that will be reflected in the whois lookup of that domain. There's also another thing that they're doing, which is they're taking over the domain and taking over all the ability to change the settings, but they don't make any changes to the root domain or the main domain. This is a practice that most people in the industry are calling domain shadowing. And this isn't something that's visible on the whois level. So there are some people who just look at the whois of their domain to make sure that everything's going fine and everything's good. But if somebody gets access to somebody's domain and adds in all of these subdomains, it's possible that they're going to be they're not going to be able to realize this if they're checking just the who is level. So why is this something that's being exploited? Think about it in terms of what is happening in the business email side of things, where you have these legitimate mailboxes that are getting compromised, and basically they're getting phished and malware and whatever. They're basically using the positive reputation of these older domains that have been around for a while, and a lot of these domains are coming from, or not a lot, but some of them are coming from legitimate companies. So there was a hack that I'll be talking about where domains that belong to Expedia were being used, and this was back when we had who is available. So they weren't changing all of the who's information before it got redacted. So basically, people were able to see that this was stuff that was legitimate, and there was a large amount of this this hijacking that happened. That mail was getting through to all sorts of places. This was bad mail that was getting through, and it was because of the positive reputation of these domains. So there wasn't as much scrutiny being applied to it because they were looking at it from a just from level, and then you just look at this domain and you find out, okay, this is something that has been around for a while. I'm not going to be blocking this. And unfortunately, they weren't catching it at the content level, so it was just getting through and getting into people's mailboxes. So the next piece that we can look at here is, how is this happening? So anybody who's on this call who's been a part of any anti-abuse or security-related webinar, blog, whatever, has probably seen most of these things. And the reason why we keep on seeing phishing, social engineering, malware, we keep on seeing these over and over again because they work. And we in our industry have a difficult time of bringing across, how you can combat yourself against this, because it's constantly changing. And one thing that I would love for people to realize from this discussion, or just me talking at you, is try and keep these things simple. Don't try and talk about all the types of malware out there or all the types of. Just think about the big pieces that put all of this together. But this is definitely how a lot of this is happening. And of course, this isn't an exhaustive list, but this is why we're seeing a lot of the domain hijacking happening out there. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at a few examples. And what I did here was I actually went through Spamhaus's Passive DNS. And what Passive DNS is it's what is called cache miss data. So DNS resolvers, they cache a bunch of DNS entries, and with that, so you don't have to constantly look up over and over again. But then there are these entries that show up for the first time, or when a cache expires in a DNS resolver. And what happens there? Spamhaus and other companies like Farsight and Security Trails, there are a few others out there that do this. They're able to collect this DNS recursive data that isn't within the DNS resolver's cache. This is all anonymized data that basically provides people to be able to look up the history of a domain, where it was pointing to at a specific state and time. So this is a tool that I use to be able to pull together a few things and a few examples to present to you today. So the next thing that we're going to look at here is just your garden variety domain hijacking. So the first thing to look at here is we have the first scene and last scene. So we are looking at that this domain was pointing to domaincontrol.com, which is GoDaddy's name server NS records. And it was first seen in 2019, and then it was last seen 2020 on the 23rd of March. And then we come up here and we look and we see that there are these new NS records that have been added. So this one, nsnewline.com, is the actual NS record that this domain is pointing to. And this NS record, both of them, are pointing to Russian infrastructure. And also this one down here is also pointing to a different IP at a different IP owner at another Russian infrastructure. So what we can glean from this is that sometime between the 23rd of March and when we first saw this on the 19th of April, this domain was hijacked by a malicious party. And the whole piece of this is that this is just your regular domain hijacking that you'll see. So we're going to go and look at the whois information. So we do a pull up of the whois, and we see that it's pointing to this, and it is reflected in the whois information. You also see, you know, where the whois server, where it was registered, and all of that nice information. You can see that the last time that it was updated was on the 18th. So if we go and look back, we see that we first saw it on the 19th. So about 24 hours later, somebody was actually querying up against this domain, and we were able to see that it was being propagated out there in the wild. So next thing that we're going to look at here is somebody getting both the domain and the subdomain compromised. And I know that there's a lot of stuff on here, but just a few things I wanted to point out. You see the domain control being in there that is pointing to GoDaddy. And then again, you see that there's the change over to the NS new line. And also, if you look closely, if you looked on the last one, there is also the A record there that's pointing to that 217, which is Russian infrastructure. Again, this is all pointing to the Russian infrastructure. One additional thing that wasn't on that first domain that I wanted to point out was they are adding in these MX records. Now, these MX records aren't pointing to Russian infrastructure; they're pointing to Google. So we're not exactly sure what is being done there with these, but virtually every time it's MX3 and MX4, and they're just adding these in. So they may be using it to do something. Maybe see how well their campaigns are going by getting all the mail to go back to Google in some way, form, or fashion. But this is just looking at the root domain or the main domain. Sorry for you DNS people out there when I say root domain. I'm not trying to upset anybody by letting anybody think that like root key servers are getting compromised. This is just somebody's actual just singular domain. And there we go. So now we're looking at a bunch of the subdomains that were created. I do not, if you look here, you'll see that this is the last time that we saw it. I didn't pull up the first time that we saw it. It was there and about around the time that the 23rd of March that most of these were added. Some were added in other intervals as well. But the main point I wanted to bring up here is that, well, they're adding all of these subdomains, and they're adding more subdomains and more subdomains. I didn't want to add in all of them for you because there were about 2,000 that were added. And they could have been used for various purposes. The main thing that I did not glean from this is that they weren't using it for straight up phishing purposes because there wasn't anything related to any major brands in there. These just look like they were randomly generated, but they definitely were a ton of them that were created for this purpose. So next piece we're looking at is a concept of domain shadowing. So we're looking at right now the root domain record or the main domain record. So you see that it's pointing to its rightful place at GoDaddy, and everything seems good. Right Amex servers pointing to it. Everything's been for a while for all of these records. So then we go and we take a look at so what we are pointing towards that, you guessed it, that Russian infrastructure. And
hey, Matt.
Yeah.
Matt, your audio just dropped out a little bit, so I'm sorry.
Okay.
Can you rewind like just a little bit to this this discussion on this slide?
Okay.
Apologies.
All right. I had the little box show up that my internet connection was unstable. So we'll start again here. So this is looking at, we looked at the main domain, and everything looked copacetic. Everything looked like it was in order. But then we go and we look at the subdomains. We do a right-hand lookup, and we see that once again you have these Russian infrastructure things pointed to. I know that I'm not digging down all the way in because I didn't want us to have like 400 slides of just you staring at passive DNS stuff. But this is all pointing towards a Russian infrastructure. But when you go and try and look this up, if you were to look it up from a whois perspective, you wouldn't have seen anything that was wrong with the actual root domain. You would have had to do a dig to see that there were these subdomains that were added to this account. So it's something that this can be a little bit more difficult for somebody to see is happening to them. But if you're tracking all of the changes that are happening to your domain, this is possibly something you could be alerted to. So this is an example of that domain shadowing issue. So I know that this isn't the greatest email out there, but Mondial Relay is a French delivery company like your UPSs or FedExes that sends out package notifications. There isn't a lot of information in this, but what you do see is you see that they have this rx.appebleintheroad.org in here a few times. And what this is serving up is it's serving up information that's trying to not only just phish, but it also we found in some cases that they were attaching malware to this as well. So essentially what they're doing is they're using this subdomain to be able to exploit Mondial Relay and try and get people to fall for the phishing that they're trying to send out. So now that we've looked at a few examples of what is being done out there, we're going to look into a couple of recent incidents with domain hijacking. And I know that there are probably more stories that I could bring through and go through, but these were three distinct stories. And a couple of, at least the open provider one, I know the people personally that were involved in that. This is just something that keeps on happening, and just giving the audience a little bit of look into what is happening is the reason that we're here today. So the first thing, open provider. This was the hijack of ehawk.net, e-hawk.net. So eHawk, they're a fraud prevention company. They're one of their founders, Raymond. He's a big veteran of the security industry. Has been a participant in MOG. Was one of the founders of another block list called Serpal, and basically knows how to do all of the right things when it comes to security best practices, and to be able to just protect his users, his company, and his intellectual property. So eHawk wrote up a very good post-mortem about this that is something that I sent over to Vicky. It wasn't something I could find on the internet, but I believe that they sent it out to their customers so people were able to see. You know, the whole thing about this is that sometime in December 2019, the attacker used a little bit of social engineering on the customer support at Open Provider. And more or less what they did is they came in, they showed them a video of trying to convince the support team at Open Provider that, hey, this actually belongs to us. What they did is they got them to transfer the domain over to another account that was at Open Provider. And the thing to think about here is since they just transferred it over to the other account, there wasn't any notification sent to the previous account owner. And then shortly after they were able to move it to the other account, they moved it to another domain registrar entirely called PDR. They didn't make any DNS changes to this domain. So EHawk, who was monitoring DNS changes on their domain, didn't see any notification or any type of issue with the domain. So they weren't aware that anything was going wrong with this. So go up to 3 weeks later in January 2020, the attacker decides to change the DNS settings. And EHawk, who monitors their DNS, is made aware of the change immediately. They take down all of the connections to their APIs and make sure that none of the network traffic that has been changed over is going to be leaked out. It's a good thing that they did that. And you know, finally, after less than 48 hours, and I can't stress hard enough, the only reason that it only took 48 hours is because they had a bunch of industry relationships. The gentleman who's mentioned directly in the report, Sam Silverman from Endurance International, actually had a contact at the domain registrar PDR and was able to help them get the domain back. In other cases, this is something that could take weeks, months for somebody to be able to prove who they are and be able to get all of this stuff back. So, you know, how did this happen? It was because of the social engineering that happened at the customer support level. EHawk had DNSSEC, EHawk had registry lock put on the domain. When the domain was moved over to the other account, they were able to, the attacker was able to silently drop domain lock. So, you know, there's all of these things that somebody can do to protect their domains, but if something's happening at the registrar level and they fall for an attacker, your domain could get hijacked. So the thing that really saved EHawk was having the industry contact, and then the next thing was monitoring their DNS and seeing that changes were happening. So very interesting issue that happened with them. So next piece is a bunch of nation-state DNS hijacks that happened, and this happened from, as you can see, 2017 to 2019, and it was worldwide. But a lot of focus that was seen was in Middle Eastern countries, a little bit of African, and a few U.S. companies and governments, and there were quite a few companies, as you can see, Cisco, FireEye, CrowdStrike, and the U.S. government that warned about this group that Talos, which is Cisco, they'd called DNS espionage, which I love how to come up with these names for groups in our industry. And you know, the way that they seem to be able to gain access to a bunch of domains that belong to these governments and companies was they actually compromised the DNS of the registrars, and they were able to make changes. They were able to redirect where these domains were going. And they actually did two campaigns. They did the redirection campaign, and then the next thing is they used those fake job websites, malware, macros, and files in an attempt to also compromise users. And it was this two-pronged attack that people were pulling this information down. And what it was found out later was a lot of the redirection was because they registered SSL certificates and they were gaining access to encrypted passwords, messages, and VPN credentials. So they were able to see all of this information that people thought was, oh, I'm encrypted, I'm good, I'm fine. And they didn't realize that, well, their whole infrastructure had been compromised. And it looks like that what happened was the registrar, a German company, Key Systems, had an issue with their EPPs. And EPP is the way that domains, when they are transferred from DNS provider to DNS provider, it shows that it sends that authorization key. And what it looked like is that that had been compromised or abused in some way, and that's how they look to be gaining access to this. And that's what happened with this nation-state DNS hijacking. So it wasn't just they were able to get access to their DNS settings, but they were actually changed everything with the DNS servers. So everything was compromised in that circumstance. So next we're looking at GoDaddy here. And GoDaddy, yes, I know, biggest registrar on the planet, and this isn't a dig at just GoDaddy. I know that all registrars out there are having certain attacks happen to them. Things have happened at Gandhi, at Network Solutions, at web.com, and the biggest reason that they're happening is, well, users are falling for things. And there's certain issues that certain registrars have. So congratulations for being the biggest registrar, GoDaddy. But it also gives us the ability to show that these issues are happening, and it helps us to be able to follow it. So next, looking at GoDaddy. So 2016, there was a list of vulnerability. And it was talking about managed DNS at cloud providers, and this was related to not Open Exchange, DigitalOcean, Rackspace, Amazon. They were all having this issue, and it was brought up, and it is assumed that this problem was also happening within GoDaddy. So fast forward to late 2018, there were a bunch of big name, legitimate brands. This is where I was talking about things like Expedia that were sending out these bomb threat emails, and there was a high delivery rate for them. Not a lot was getting rejected, and it went back to that positive reputation of the domains and the legitimacy of the domains that made these get delivered. So there were a couple of articles written about this, and a lot of it came to light in January 2019. Ars Technica and Krebs, Brian Krebs, wrote up these articles talking about these bomb threats emails, and this is also where they identified they identified it was RFG who identified it looked like it was a Russian group that they dubbed Spammy Bear, that was responsible and hijacked over 4,000 domains, and they were using it for all sorts of things, not just bomb threats. And this actually, once GoDaddy saw this report, or this report came to light, they sent out a notification saying, "Hey, we've fixed this issue. We've remediated it." The only thing is unfortunately in February 2019 there were remnants that hijack that was still going on, and they were able to reanalyze, and they were able to finally snuff it out. So unfortunately, that is not the end. We at Spamhaus have been looking at issues that we've been seeing happening within GoDaddy. These are things that have been happening at a much smaller scale at some other registrars, but for the most part, we've seen an overwhelming amount of this happening at GoDaddy. So in June 2019, we saw a huge domain shadowing campaign happening, over 10,000 domains. The good news is that once it was brought to their attention, GoDaddy was able to snuff it out pretty quickly. And again, this is all pointing to Russian infrastructure. So it seems like this is a little bit connected between that spamming bear phenomenon and what we've been seeing. We're not 100% sure, but yes, it's all pointing to Russia. We've seen them go from, after they see this domain shadowing happen, they go back to just directly hijacking the domains. So they've been doing this at a high keel from December 2019 up until it's happening today, and it's happening upwards of 100 domains daily, sometimes more. And we have everybody loves graphs. So we have a few numbers here, and all of these, with the exception of March, and maybe they were self-quarantining with us and weren't hijacking as much. But now in April, everything's popped back up. But the most important thing to see here is that, well, this is happening in mass, and unfortunately, it's something that we're not exactly sure how it's happening, because we're confident that there's no DNS hijacking happening, and they've patched all of the things that were happening with their DNS management. So there's certain issues that we haven't been able to find and be able to resolve. So it's something that we're going to keep an eye on looking at. So a couple of things that Spamhaus has been doing to track a little bit with this with the GoDaddy hijacks. So the very first way that we were able to see this as well, when people hijack things, they're going to send out their big campaigns and try to compromise as many people as possible, either through phishing or gathering credentials, installing malware, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the first way that we saw it. So we saw that, again, these were domains that were older. It wasn't something that was likely for a malicious party to register, sit on for 2, 3, 4 years, and then sending spam as. But these were actual domains that had legitimate stuff on them that were just had been hijacked. And what we ended up doing is we pulled the thread from that. And the last thing on here is we use Passive DNS to be able to track and be able to identify patterns. And the good thing that we were able to do from this is when the domains hadn't been remediated yet, we were able to list them on our reputation network. So in some cases, the domain owners would reach out to us, and we were able to help them learn what was wrong and point them in the right direction. And that's the most important thing is knowing what to do and having a little bit of advice. So anybody who's in this webinar today, the things that you learn from here, if you happen to find somebody or see somebody who has been affected by domain hijacking, you'll know a few things to be able to tell them some steps that they can do to be able to protect themselves. So now we've seen a couple of things, and I now want to talk about what you can do, what people can do. So we're looking at domain owners being able to protect themselves. Then we're going to look at networks, and finally a few things for registrars. So I imagine that anybody who has read anything about these best common practices has probably seen everything in here. You know, the first thing on here is two-factor authentication and passphrase management. I hate using passwords, but I used it in there anyways when I say strong passwords. But it's really make it so much more difficult for somebody to be able to gain access to the ability to change your stuff. And you know, the next things on there, DNSSEC and registry lock. Those are things that when you're looking at a registrar, make sure that they offer those. You know, and also just research everything about the registrar. Have they had a compromise? Has something happened? Do they make a lot of transparent statements about issues that are happening within their networks? It's very important to know that your registrar is keeping on top of these types of things. And you know, also limit your ability to access. Yes, registry and registrar lock. Yes, I thank you, Paul. And yes, so it's limit the access. Don't give everybody in your company access to the ability to change your DNS settings. Make sure that it belongs to a few certain amounts of people. And also, you know, track any changes. You can use things like Passive DNS. You can use things. There are also other services out there that monitor these types of things. That monitor the changes and will notify you if there has been a change made. And that's, you know, that's what you can do as a domain owner. And I imagine if you look for best practices in protecting domains, if you just Google that, you will find a bunch of other recommendations out there. So, you know, go for it, research, find many things that you can do to protect yourself. So, yep, there you go. There, Emil. You can look at checkdns.co and Newstar. They have free DNS monitoring. So, I mean, that's something that you guys can sign up for, and it will check those changes. So next piece is looking at protecting networks. So if you're able to, if you're just a corporation, you can do NetFlow analysis and see certain things that are happening on your network, where people are going. If you suddenly find that a bunch of traffic on your network is going to a place that it's never gone before, you may want to look a little bit more into that. And then you can research using Passive DNS. You can use Spamhaus's stuff, Farsight stuff, security trails. These guys all have these big things that you can search through and be able to see if there's an issue. Depending on how big your organization is, you'll be able to access a lot of this stuff for free. And then next is looking at Border Gateway Protocol, BGP, ranges that have been hijacked that may be serving up some of this bad DNS. The bad DNS stuff. You can be able to do all of that and protect it from both incoming and outgoing. Next, DNS Firewall. This is protecting your users from outgoing things. So somebody gets an email that is a phishing email, and if the domain or the IP that domain resolves to that's going to the phishing website is listed in the person's feeds that they're consuming, it will block the resolution of that site. So it can protect those customers' employees and also give them the ability to teach that user because you can redirect to an internal web page that says you happen to click on a phishing link. Here are some things and some awareness and whatnot around it. And finally, the awareness training, and that's something that we should all be doing to certain levels. Some people need it more than others. Final thing that we're going to look at here is what registrars can do. Now, a lot of this stuff that I pulled and put up here, this is something that's actually a work in progress by the DNS abuse special interest group at MOG, and it's something that they're working on getting published. You know, a lot of this was written by people who work at registries or have worked at registries or work at big DNS providers. And you know, they're adding their expertise and things that they think should be done. So very first thing, robust reporting. So it's looking at things like how accounts are being accessed, what IPs are doing. You know, a big thing when I was working at Rackspace in the anti-abuse space was we had a thing that we called the Santa Claus rule. So essentially, when a user tried to log in, and they log in from, let's say, where I am in Indiana, and then 5 seconds later they logged in from China, and then another 5 seconds later they logged in from Brazil, there may be a little something going on there with that customer. So you know, that's something that is very important. Looking at those the IPs, where are they logging into? What's the user doing most of the time? And then you know, being able to check against known bad IPs trying to log in, and that's where you can pull against all sorts of threat intelligence providers to be able to stop that those logins from happening, or at least sending notifications to users saying, hey, something wonky is going on with your account. And then looking at those high-profile domains. And nothing's more embarrassing than getting a high-profile domain compromised. If you're a registrar, you know, they've been dependent on you. So it's being able to identify those things. I know that every user that has their domain wants their domain to be high-profile, but there's certain domains that are going to be more high-profile than others, and that's why they should look at those and be able to monitor those and put some extra pieces in place. Two-factor authentication, everybody should implement it everywhere. And have a regular review. I know that I'm reading over these slides, but and then the awareness training. And finally, work within the anti-abuse industry. Communicate. Find out if you're having a problem, maybe somebody else is having a problem somewhere else. And you know, this is a thing that you know, I've seen multiple times over and over, that you run into a company that's having this problem, and they spend days, weeks, months going through the issue, and then that problem is resolved at that one company. They just jump over to the next company, and since the company that had all of the problems doesn't say anything about it, they're just like, well, we resolved it. We've done everything in due diligence of our own company. Let's just move along. But the thing I want people to realize is that anti-abuse isn't a competitive advantage. It's something where you should be sharing your experiences so people can learn and people can stop the badness from happening out there. So you know, it's an important thing to do, to think about. So with all of that, let's go to the question and answer section. So we're going to go back over to Eddie, who is going to read over these questions to me, and I will answer as well as I can.
All right. We'll let you catch your breath for just a second, Matt. So
Okay.
Thanks for that. That was really excellent. Thanks a bunch. So a couple of softball questions. Let's see. Will the slides be available online? I know.
Yeah, I can make them into a PDF and send them.
I don't know if you're going to make the slides available as well.
Yeah, we'll post them with the recording. It'll be up by Friday and probably, you know, by the end of the day today. It just depends on how long it takes YouTube to and Zoom to process the recording. So. Okay.
Yeah, and these two, Matt, these two questions are related. So, and I just answered one with a link, but Jacob had asked, what is registry lock? And then we'd also had someone ask for confirmation that e-hawknet did not have the registry lock. So if you want to expand on that a little bit, I put in the chat a link to Krebs on security, has a great blog on this in terms of the registry lock part. Do you want to expand on what you've said some?
So as far as I know, they had registry lock. I may have misread, but when they were able to transfer the account over, they removed registry lock.
Right, exactly. So
Yeah.
they had the registry lock. They did not have a registrar lock. So
Yeah.
the registrar lock is a much more manual process. It doesn't allow for this sort of transitioning between different registries.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so that the link I put in there to the answered question, Jacob, should lead you to more information there. And let me see.
Yeah, and everybody can prove me right or wrong when they read the postmortem that was done by EHawk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you're mostly right. It's all good. So let's see. Can you registry lock a subdomain?
If you lock the domain, I believe that everything is locked.
Yeah, that would be my.
I'm not an expert, so I believe that if you lock it, everything's locked.
Yeah,
I mean the main thing to think about here when you're thinking about registry locking your stuff is preventing the transfer. It's kind of like thinking about locking your credit score.
Right. Yeah, and when you think about a subdomain, I mean, you're essentially getting the domain from the registry. So after that delegation point, the remaining delegations on down for subdomains are for yourself. So I think we're good on that.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to mention we had a comment. I want to point out that the examples that were given about being misdirected to Russian infrastructure, the point was not that Russian infrastructure in and of itself is bad, is that these organizations had no valid business presence in Russia. So we're not saying, that redirecting to Russia is a horrible thing. If you have valid business and valid, if you live in Russia, obviously you're going to have Russian infrastructure. The examples given did not have that. So just a point of clarity there. Let's see here. A few more questions.
Thank you for the comment from the Krebs article.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, if you read and question and answer everybody, it is answered in there.
Yeah. Oh wow, here's one from sort of an internet celebrity, shall I say. Joe Saint Save says, can you share some details on the PDNS patterns you use to find the GoDaddy domain hijacks, if that's not confidential?
I could probably share that with you directly, Joe.
Okay, that's a fair response. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And just a personal hello to Joe. I worked with Joe on internet news things like, oh my goodness, like 20 years ago. So anyway, let's see. I think we've, Bashar asked, can you share all the possible tools for monitoring whois and DNS? Matt, is there like a ending slide that covers most of what you've talked about, or some other place we can point people to?
So there is a little bit more on here, but it's basically linking to most of Spamhaus's stuff.
Gotcha.
We can I can see if I can get a more, not fully exhaustive, but a larger list, especially when you're talking about things like monitoring and whatnot. And I will get that over to Vicky, and she can distribute.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Shan actually asked about DNS DOE and bind release dates. Vicky, do you want to take that one?
Sure. Sorry, I didn't see that particular question. We have so many questions here.
I know. Yeah, the one about DOE just popped up. So
yeah, I can put a link in the chat. We have published our design outline for DOE, and we have internally already got the primary side working. The secondary side is not yet implemented, but our committed dates are to have an implementation with the bind tools, DIG in particular, within the next 2 months. And all this is happening in the 9.17 development branch. Having it complete implementation by the fall, and then backporting to our current stable branch, 9.16, by the end of this year. But I will put in the chat a link to the wiki page that describes the plan. And I think if you simply follow the bind 9.17 GitLab, you'll be able to see us committing on that project.
Thank you, Vicki.
I'd like to throw in a question. Maybe, if you don't mind, Matt, you could advance to your slide that has the references on there and point out a few of them.
Okay, so essentially, a few things that you can do, and this is looking at things that that Spamhaus offers, and the first thing on here is Passive DNS. So essentially, you can we offer there is a free version of the Passive DNS that you could check against, that would be able to let you be able to monitor your domains. Now, if you have hundreds of domains, the free stuff is probably not going to be for you. But anyways, that's something that is available for free. And then the next thing on here is talking about our DNS firewall stuff, and that's to protect users from exfiltration stuff. So it'll block things on the outbound. And then yeah. So that's essentially the two things that we're really talking about here, and yeah, I do want to be able to provide a better list talking about the other stuff, the monitoring things. I'm going to take some of it from the chat that's happened here in Zoom, and I will try to give credit to people where credit is due.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt.
Okay. Yep.
So Eddie, there are a couple of questions here specifically about what a registrar can and can't do. I don't know if you saw my suggestion in the chat.
Let me see. Let me pull up the chat. I'm in the Q&A.
Yeah, I know. It's confusing on our side, but anyway, we have somebody online who I believe is a registrar who might be willing to answer those directly.
Okay, so I see Casper says registrars work with second level domains, so locking it will affect the subdomains as well. Right, exactly. Let's see here. Yeah, some of this, as the registrars and registries are different, there's obviously going to be differences in their implementation. So certainly that is something to be aware of. Did that cover it well enough, Vicki? I'm trying to think.
Well, I just gave Francisco the ability to chime in if he would like to.
Okay, excellent.
That was what I was referring to.
Okay. Our good friend Paul E also says, ultratools.com/DNS tools. And then there's dnscheck.co. I'm trying to think. I know there was DNS, I'm trying to think of the one in Sweden that I can't bring to mind at the moment.
What you're thinking of is a certificate transparency service, I think. It's run by a Swedish university where you can sign up and they'll notify you if somebody has
No, this is actually a zone checking tool, and trying to just do a quick search for it. Yeah, it used to be Zone Master, or I guess now it is zonemaster.iis.se.
Oh, okay.
Zonemaster.net, I believe, is the correct site. Just double checking. Yeah, it's by IIS and AFNIC. So both supporters of ISC. So thank you very much. Let's see here. Paul also points out that RIPE has a DNS monitor for RIPE members as well. Yeah. You also note that Vicky has put in the GitLab link for Do and Dot. Maybe you said that, Vicky, I'm not sure, into the webinar chat. So wow, we're getting close to the top of the hour here. I think this is one of our most interactive sessions, so this is great. Usually we're struggling for questions at this point, but a lot of interaction and a lot of panel participant answering as well. It's great.
I did also put in a link for MOG. Just like to give a little shout out. It's a malware and anti-abuse industry group. They have a fairly active working groups, and Matt was referencing a best practices guide that they're working on. Some of the information they produce, you have to be a member to access, but it's worth looking at. There is a link in the chat. I can repost it to top post it a bit. Okay, yeah, thanks for doing that.
And Vicky, I wanted to do one last thing here. You know, thank you for hosting everything today. And also, this was done with our partner Security Zones. And if you guys have questions about any commercial aspects or free trials or whatnot, you can contact Arnie there at Security Zones, and he can help you through a lot of it. Also, I'll make sure that when the email gets sent out that my email address is on there. I am the industry liaison for Spamhaus, so questions and whatnot, you can send it to me, and if I can't answer it, I can find the person who can answer it.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt.
Yep.
Right quick, we had William says, I'm trying to understand what passive DNS really is. Can I get more detail on this? So yeah, if you go to the Spamhaus site, Matt, maybe you can guide him through, but there's certainly lots of information about what passive DNS is. We did cover some of that very early on, so I suspect we had a late joiner there.
Yeah, so yeah, essentially passive is, think about it as like a historical collection of DNS data. And what it is really, in short, it's cache miss data. So anything that's within in a DNS resolver's cache won't be in passive DNS. Anything that isn't in that cache will go into passive DNS. So it's something that if it hasn't been seen before or it isn't in the cache of somebody's DNS resolver, it gets collected into that. And it's something that's anonymized and essentially just looks at the history. There is a link to something that explains it in much more detail.
Excellent. And also, William, we will be posting the recording of this, so you can go back and Matt gave a great intro to passive DNS really early in this session. And with that, we are very close to the top of the hour. So I'm going to go ahead and say thank you all for joining. We do appreciate your participation. Thank you to all the IST supporters that are on the line. And we will see you at our next webinar. Vicky, when is the next one? Do we have one next week?
The next one is actually a Kia webinar. It's on the Stork management dashboard, but the one after that is your webinar on eDNS client subnet identifier.
Yep, exactly. Okay, cool. Well, we hope to see you at those. And again, thanks for joining, and we will talk to you soon. Take care.